I think everyone was confused, partly because what happened in Sonoma County in California after Prop 2 and Prop 12 went into effect was such a mess. But really, the story begins in 2008, because in 2008, Californians voted overwhelmingly. More Californians supported this proposition to ban battery cages than any ballot initiative in California history. I think it was like 64% of the public said, let's get these hens out of cages. And went into effect in January 1st, 2015. And lo and behold, what do we find when we start walking into these factory farms? The battery cages are still there. And maybe the most prominent example of this was Sunrise Farms, because the owner of Sunrise, Arnie Reedley, was one of the people being lionized for adopting the practices of Prop 2. He had been covered in the New York Times. There had been a headline in the New York Times talking about how California hens are now living a good life. And I thought it was highly relevant that this significant figure in the egg industry was still confining hens in batter cages. And for the record, there's just no dispute about this. The footage we have from 2016, 2017 shows demonstrably batter cages, hundreds of thousands of hens. So we thought, let's bring this to government and see what they will do about it. And for years, they basically completely ignored us. We'd send complaint after complaint. We would explain with expert testimony, expert declarations that these clearly are battery cages. They're clearly violating Prop 2. They didn't even bother to respond. In fact, there was a game of hot potato going on between the Attorney General's office, the California Department of Food and Ag, and local prosecutors. All of them were saying, oh, it's not my responsibility to go to the Department of Agriculture. It's not my responsibility to go to a local prosecutor. And no one was willing to even kind of have a collective conversation to figure out whose responsibility it actually was. And so this goes on for basically 3 years. And after years of not just seeing these violations of California's Prop 2, but just egregious animal cruelty. So one of the most horrific instances, we found a hen who was collapsed on the ground of a battery cage. Her feet were all kind of basically distorted and grotesquely kind of broken to the point that she was not able to stand, and all the other hens were just trampling on her. And there were just countless stories like this unfolding at Sunrise Farms and other egg farms in California. And we thought we got to do something about this if the government's not. So in 2018, after we had already organized at that point, I think multiple mass open rescues, actions where large numbers of people, hundreds of people, just peacefully, nonviolently, often with flowers and peace signs. After calling the authorities ourselves, saying, you got to come help these animals. If you don't, we will. We just go in and start helping them. And Sunrise was sort of the epitome of this movement. In 2018, we had 500 people walk onto Sunrise. It was particularly notable because Sunrise was not just a facility lauded by the New York Times, but it was also a certified humane Whole Foods facility at a time where the natural foods movement was just really blowing up. Everyone thought humane, cage-free, organic, this is the next wave of food. And it got an enormous amount of attention. Vice, The Intercept, every publication locally covered this extensively. And I honestly thought the legal case was stronger than any case we've ever brought, not just because of necessity, but because of the extensive documentation of animal cruelty evidence, the efforts that were made even by people inside the government to try and get some of these laws enforced. There was a government veterinarian who, shortly after Sunrise, actually wrote a report indicating that animals at factory farms in Sonoma County were being so cruelly abused that many of them could not walk. They were starving to death with gaping holes in their side that were necrotic and rotting because the animals were not being properly cared for and the intensive confinement was causing so much abuse. And so partly because of legal defenses, partly because I just thought the grim cruelty was so horrific and the government's own acknowledgement that it was happening was so egregious that surely a jury would side with us. But that's not what happened. In 2023, we went on trial. It was supposed to be I think, 2-week trial. Ended up being a 2-month trial, and I was convicted of felony conspiracy, misdemeanor trespass for organizing that action.
And tell us also about Reichardt.
I honestly did not organize Reichardt. I got convicted for trespass at Reichardt mainly because I gave a speech outside of the demonstration and then walked apparently a couple steps onto the driveway at some point. But Reichardt was a mass open rescue that occurred the next year in Sonoma County in 2019, also with around 500 people, where activists didn't just rescue animals, they also literally locked their necks on the line. They put their necks on the line of the slaughterhouse to prevent it from continuing its operations. It was a duck farm that also had evidence of egregious animal cruelty, including large numbers of animals collapsed on their backs, just pedaling, unable to reach food and water. And a number of other activists just locked their necks to the front gate so the gate couldn't close or open, which is actually somewhat symbolic because there was a back gate that they could have used. So that
Yeah.
evidence was sort of not really raised at trial very much by the prosecution. But I was involved as a lawyer primarily in that case and as a speaker. So I spoke very strongly in defense of the activists. I thought they were doing the right thing. I gave food and water to the activists who were locked on a very hot summer day. And so I walked on the driveway a few times, gave some activists, I think, some granola bars and some water. And for that, I was convicted of trespass in the same case. So it was kind of a case where all the different Sonoma County mass open rescues were brought in to one single omni case. And I was prosecuted for all of them. I will say one other fact is that through the kind of 1.5, 2 year period from 2018 to the end of 2019, when all these mass open rescues were happening, there was another mass open rescue at a facility called Petaluma Poultry at the end of 2018 that I did organize. There were, I believe it was at least around 150, maybe close to 200 separate activists who were charged initially with felonies in all these cases. Only one person served jail time, that's me, and only one person was convicted after going to trial. And that's actually something that I think needs to be strongly revisited because I think one of the problems in this mass defense case was that we didn't have the right tools and strategy and culture to make sure more people went to court. Because at the end of the 2 year period, the last man standing was me. I was the only one going to trial. And I think that was not strategically the right move for the movement.
Yeah, actually, well, Stefan, before I get to, I just want to ask Wayne one more background question. But before we get to that, were there any facts that you think that we should know about either of these that Wayne didn't mention that you would like to add?
I don't think so. I think we did a pretty good job. I mean, I think it is, again, worth emphasizing the scale of both these actions and also the trial, the amount of witnesses, just how long it took. It was quite an undertaking.
And Wayne, I do have just one more background question, especially given what you just said. Can you just talk a little bit? You're not allowed to do a half an hour on this, because we have the case to get to. And I know this is a big question, but just talk a little about what you just said about how this didn't really work as well as you would hope for in an open rescue case, and how this fits into the whole major strategy of open rescue, and what worked, what didn't.
Yeah, let me just start by saying we saved 37 lives at Sunrise. 37 made it out. One of them passed away shortly after arriving the veterinarian. A number of them died shortly after that, too. But for that reason, it was an enormous success. And honestly, every time I think about it, I'm just so happy because I got to see these little birds walk into the sunlight for the first time. And it's just, if you haven't seen this, it's just such a magical experience to see a creature who's been trapped in a cage her entire life see the sun for the first time. There's nothing that will give you more hope for the future of the world than that. I
Yeah,
mean, even just
no,
talking
I'm
about it now
totally
is very
with you.
powerful. Yeah, it's
I mean,
so
you can't call
powerful.
them a failure,
Yeah,
but you can think about
yeah,
what
for
could they have
sure.
done better.
No, I think 100%. I mean, I think there were a couple things that I think led to significant problems as we move forward in the case. The first, frankly, was just that it just got drawn out forever and people got tired. People who are super gung ho and spirited and ready to fight in 2018, by the time we went to trial in 2023, 5 years,
Yeah, well, there was a
they've
pandemic.
moved
That was
on.
it. That was an
Yeah, there
issue.
was a pandemic, but we've had other cases, even subsequent to the pandemic, that get dragged out far too long.
Yeah,
And, I think one of the mistakes we made was, to a certain extent, listening to our criminal defense lawyers. I mean, it's a mantra of criminal defense law that every continuation is a victory because you're not in jail. And that's just not true of these movement cases because we have these other objectives. And unlike the kind of typical criminal defendant, our defendants are actually really excited to tell our story. We want to tell our story. And if you keep drawing it out, it's kind of like a
yeah,
movie that you keep promising people. I mean, it's like, or a video game. This is probably beyond your demographic, Marion, but there's this famous joke about Grand Theft Auto. I
yeah.
think it's Grand
I
Theft
have
Auto
no
4.
idea what you just
It's
said.
been like 15 years.
I
It's like the
admit
most
it.
famous game in the history of video gaming, and it's never come out. And at this point, everyone's just tired and done with it and doesn't want to deal with it anymore. And that's kind of the way it was with us. The second big thing was infighting. I think partly because, it's a 5 year wait before going to Sunrise Farms and then going to trial. And partly because the movement just didn't have the conflict resolution kind of capacities and institutional structures to resolve disagreements. Just eventually people get into little scuffles of each other.
Yeah,
And that was extremely demoralizing. I mean, I could tell you 100% that the number one reason a lot of the defendants ended up taking generous pleas, and it was the right thing for them, was because they were just tired of all the fighting. They're just kind of sick and tired of having other animal rights activists and vegans attacking them. And they were like, I don't want to deal with this. I'm going home. I'm moving on with my life. And so those are the two mistakes. I do think there were some legal mistakes made too. And since this is an animal law podcast, I would say probably the biggest legal mistake we made, in my view, was not doing a more aggressive job in vetting the judge. Because I think we kind of just thought this judge is someone who's like reasonably well known. She's young, she's a woman, so she's probably gonna be good for us. And I
Well,
think
what
the
do you mean
role that
vetting? Like
so
you
in
don't get to choose your
California,
judge.
yeah. Well, in California, you do. You have
What?
the right to actually disqualify a judge once just by kind of signing a declaration, an affidavit saying we think this judge is biased.
Oh my God. California, you people are nuts.
And there are other ways like change of venue, change of judge. There are other things that could be done, but just making sure you've got the right forum even before you make the right arguments. Because I think fundamentally, my guess is Stefan will agree with this. The biggest obstacle in the case was just the judge, and it was the most hostile judge. And I've dealt with extraordinarily hostile judges. I've had other judges threaten me with contempt
Yeah.
of court, try to throw me in jail. This was like on another level.